Hey everyone, today's video is about the new 1.16.0.61 Bedrock Edition beta, and well, this has already been out for a few days, but I haven't done a video about it yet because there have been quite a few mob despawning changes, and I have been testing them in depth, and yeah, basically I just don't want to have any false information in my video. I want you guys to get the correct information and crystal clear, and that is what I did. But yeah, this brings some small changes, but the biggest changes are of course in the mob despawning. Alright then, so the first changes that were made, or rather fixes, is that, well, now the animations for blocks are actually back again. So in the previous 1.16.0.6t beta, which is a beta I didn't cover because it was rather boring, the block animations were completely broken. So the fire would not, well, burn in terms of moving, the water would not flow, lava wouldn't either, campfires, whatnot. Even blocks like sea lanterns, you may not notice, but sea lanterns have an animation. As you can see, there is a slight circle that is going outwards from the center, and yeah, so that didn't work in the previous beta, now it works again. Most of these block animations are fairly subtle, but I'm not gonna show you all the blocks that were not working in the previous beta. All you need to know is that everything is back to normal. Another change is that, well, the beacon beams appear again. They didn't appear in the last beta for some reason. The changelog also lists a fix for a bug that, well, you know, the walls, when they have a block on top, they get this little thing right there, and now they will get the proper shape when something is placed on top of them. Like torches and stuff, they wouldn't properly change the shape of the wall like this, but now they do, and that's pretty cool, I guess. Another fix listed in the changelog is that kelp will now grow properly. And according to them, the issue was that the kelp would have already a growth update scheduled, and well, it would add another one, and for some reason that would stop it from growing, like reaching too high of an age or something. I'm not sure if that's exactly how it works, but apparently it works again. I haven't tested that yet because I've been hard at work testing the more important changes. But yeah, that is pretty big. I think that is like the 6th time they attempted to fix the kelp issues, and well, if now it is actually fixed, that would be pretty great. Another change made according to the changelog is that ice will only now appear or form, well, you know, water will freeze into ice when it has a block adjacent to it. And well, that is a parity change because in Java Edition that's exactly what happens. It does seem like that is what's happening right now, so you see that only blocks on the edges are freezing because they have the glass adjacent to it. And well, that will make some ice farms a little slower in Bedrock, but overall it's not really too bad of a change. I suppose it is a little detrimental, but since they are in some ways going for parity, I suppose they do want to stay consistent and add it across and not be selective of what they add and what they don't. But yeah, so it's just one change, but in my opinion it doesn't really matter too much, because the rather fast ice farms already have a lot of blocks close to the water sources, so that means that ice will form more or less at the same rate for the really fast farms, which of course is not something that matters for most people, and well, this too won't either. Alright, now we can get to the really interesting changes, which are more or less the mob spawning or despawning changes. There aren't exactly mob spawning changes in this update, but there are some despawning changes that are very important and are currently flawed. And I'm going to explain the flaws, but I am not going to explain how to fix it, because that is going to be in a future video, and that is something that I and some TechRock members and some other people from other servers you may know are working on. And well, that is going to be something very interesting. We have a lot of ideas on how to improve the current despawning and spawning for Bedrock Edition in order to make it more consistent with Java Edition and also actually provide value. The first bug fix in regards to that sort of stuff is that, I quote, changed mob population cap to only count mobs with spawn rules. Basically what that means is that these sweet armor stands, look, they're all holding hands, it's so cute, they do not count towards the global mob cap anymore. And before they counted towards the global mob cap, And I assume that was because they had to be able to wear armor and all that, and that's why they counted towards the global mob cap, and that meant that they could potentially prevent mobs from appearing, assuming they were in large enough numbers. So right here I have 200, so that is basically just a rectangle of 10 times 20 armor stands, and well, 200 armor stands fills the mob cap exactly. We can easily test if this does indeed work, so we're going just to set the time to midnight, and forgot the T, and we can turn the difficulty to hard. And we should see mob spawning. You see, there are mob spawning, so that means these do not count towards the global mob cap anymore. And well, this does indeed break mob switches that make use of armor stands, but that doesn't really matter much because it's a very niche thing that people hardly ever used, including even the technical communities. So, well, I don't see that as too bad of a thing, and it is more consistent. It's pretty weird anyway that armor stands count towards the mob cap. Now we can get to the really interesting changes. Now there were changes done to the mob despawning, something that was already changed when the first 1.16 beta was released. So first, of course, I'm going to explain to you how it works. So we have this armor stand right here, which we're going to say is the player, so that I can just move around and demonstrate everything to you. And well, basically what will happen is that around this armor stand, 24 blocks out, nothing will spawn. So in this green area, nothing spawns. And well, I have shown this as a circle. It's actually a sphere, so it goes three-dimensional. I just have it like this because of course it's on a flat plane and it's easier to demonstrate. But basically from 0 to 24 blocks from the player, of course in a sphere centered on the player, nothing will spawn. The spawns will be blocked. And well, there also is the spawning radius, so that means I have it marked in gray concrete right here, from 24 blocks away from the player to 54 blocks away. So up until right here, I have it under the stained glass because I am visualizing the despawning with the stained glass. Yeah, from 24 to 54 blocks, the mobs will spawn. And that, of course, also is a sphere. And it basically is a hollow sphere because in that 0 to 24 sphere, nothing will spawn. The despawning works the same, so the despawning also works in spheres, and of course it works sometimes overlapped with despawning radius, and sometimes it doesn't. So in this yellow area right here, this is from 25 blocks away from the player to 31 blocks away from the player, mobs will spawn like normal and nothing will despawn. And then in this orange area right here, this is from 32 to 54 blocks, the mobs will only despawn after 30 seconds of not having taken any damage, and then it's a 1 in 800 chance for them to despawn. And a 1 in 800 chance is of course every game tick, and there are 20 game ticks per second, so it will be an average of 40 seconds after the 30 seconds of not taking damage that the mobs will be able to despawn. And of course that is a random chance, so like any other random chance, it's not guaranteed to be after 40 seconds, but yeah, it is on average 40 seconds. And then 55 blocks and any given distance further than that, mobs will instantly go poof and despawn. Once again, those despawning ranges also are in a sphere. This is the system that was introduced in the first 1.16 beta and that persisted until the last beta. But in this beta there were some slight changes. The first change, which is also listed here on screen, is that the mob despawn range is now tied to the simulation range. Basically what this means is that the mob despawning radius, well, the multiple radiuses, I don't know, will scale with the simulation distance you have on your world. So that means that the despawning is still a sphere, but it just changes depending on the simulation distance of your world. However, that was not the only change made, because, well, as you may know, the ranges were 32 to 54, there was the 1 in 800 chance, and then past 54 blocks, everything despawned. But that was changed in the 1.16.0.61 beta. So I am not going to discuss the different despawn ranges for a simulation distance of 6 and higher, because, well, I'm going to explain that later, but in a nutshell, the most relevant simulation distance is that one of 4. And when the world is at a simulation distance of 4, there are severe issues with the despawning that definitely need to be fixed, and it will be another video where I discuss on how that could be fixed. But what just happened in the 1.16.0.61 beta is that the instant despawn sphere was reduced. Well, the radius was reduced. That means there is a larger area in which mobs will despawn. In this current beta, the radius for instant despawn was changed from 54 to around 44. We cannot confirm it exactly because we don't have any way to access the code, because of course we can only decompile the server software, which only gets released with full releases. And yeah, so our assumption is that it is around 44, maybe 42, maybe 43, it could be an arbitrary number, but with a simulation distance of 4, the instant despawn range will be at around 44 blocks. Now, this is a big issue. You're probably asking why, and well, there's quite a simple answer for you. First of all, it is ridiculously tiny, so that means if you are 44 blocks away from a mob, it will just go poof. And well, that's something that is sort of detrimental to normal gameplay. 54 blocks is still manageable, but 44 blocks is just going over the top. And the second problem is that the instant despawn radius actually overlaps with the spawning radius. And what that means is that there actually are 10 blocks of radius space where mobs will spawn and instantly despawn. That's really concerning. Just for comparison, I'm just going to demonstrate the approximate amount of spawning spaces you have on a flat plane, comparing the initial 1.16 system and the system that was introduced in the 1.16.0.61 beta. So of course this is not representative of all situations like a mob farm or whatnot, but I'm just trying to give you a sense of how many spawning spaces you are losing by having this despawn radius, the instant despawn radius, made 10 blocks smaller, or I guess 10 blocks bigger, but 10 blocks closer to the player. In the initial 1.16 despawn system, where the instant despawn radius does not overlap with the spawning radius, we can simply calculate the amount of spawning spaces by having the surface area of 0 to 54, which is simply pi radius squared, and then subtracting the 0 to 24 radius as well. And well, we get around 7,350 spawning spaces, and well, of course, again, that is only for a flat plane, it doesn't account for 3D and whatnot. And with the new 1.16.0.61 despawning system, there is effectively 10 blocks less of radius that we can utilize, and of course it is outside, and because it is outside, that means it's more spawning spaces than if it would be inside. So if we account for those 10 blocks radius of space where the mobs spawn and then instantly despawn, we only have around 3,079 spawning spaces left. So yes, we lost over half the spawning spaces. It doesn't really mean that we lost them, because of course when the mobs instantly despawn there, they will just start spawning in here again. But another problem of course is that this is wasted system resources, so it causes additional lag because, well, spawning in a mob and then instantly despawning is kind of pointless, and well, there is just a plethora of other reasons why this is stupid. And if this seems ridiculous to you, I totally understand it, and if you don't believe me, well, I'm just going to show you. I'm just going to turn the game rule command blocks enabled to false, just to prove that I'm not using any command blocks. There you go. And now I can just use the free cam. If you don't know what free cam is, it's just a way to detach the camera from the player, so that, well, you know, the player still stays there, and the spawning radius is still done relative to the player. So I am actually still there, but just the camera is detached. And what I've done here is that I cleared out a area from 0 to 64 blocks, so I just set it to air, and then I made an area of 44 to 54 blocks and set it to solid blocks, so spawnable blocks. And in this area, the mobs will spawn and instantly despawn, and that is quite ridiculous. So we can just test that. We set difficulty to hard, and we can set time to midnight. And as you can see, it's hard to see any mobs at all, and that is of course because they are spawning and then instantly despawning. You saw a mob flash right there. Well, it's a mob that is spawning and instantly despawning. We can actually give ourselves some night vision so that we can see it easier, but they do definitely spawn and then instantly despawn, so we can just wait for a mob to spawn. You saw those? Yeah, that's the mobs that are spawning and instantly despawning. And I have to say, this is quite ridiculous, but I do understand why this was made, or at least I think I do. We can just take a few more moments to admire the mobs that are spawning and then instantly despawning, and then I will explain to you why this change was made. At least I think I know why it was made, but it might be something different, although I am quite sure I do know why this change was made. Let's just admire it a little longer. We can see the mobs flashing, and well, it does happen pretty fast because the cap gets cleared instantly since, you know, the mobs instantly despawn. And well, that is actually quite sad to look at, but it also is a little funny, I suppose. So, of course, as seen in the changelog for this beta, the despawning changes scale with the simulation distance. And we are of course testing this on a simulation distance of 4. And it's only on a simulation distance of 4 that this issue persists, because of course it scales up. It won't be 44 anymore when the simulation distance is not 4 anymore. So we can just test that out real quick. We're just going to set the time to midnight and whatnot. As you can see, when we put it to hard, the mobs are still flashing. However, when we leave the world, we can just quickly set it to simulation distance of 6 and get back in. The mobs will not instantly despawn anymore, they will spawn like normal. Let's just get back to where we were, and we should see some mobs already. As you can see, the skeletons and the zombies and whatnot, they are spawning fine, and they're also staying fine, not despawning like they randomly were before, which is rather a good thing. But here's why this is still a problem. So first of all, what you need to know is that worlds on realms are locked to a simulation distance of 4. That means you have absolutely no way of turning it up, and this change will stay. That means you will be forced to have a simulation distance of 4, and well, it will ruin gameplay and mob farms and whatnot, pretty much everything regarding mobs, because it's pretty stupid. And of course, it does also hog up more system resources. It is more laggy to have mobs spawn and instantly despawn. And of course, having a world on a simulation distance of 6 will also be laggier for the device. Instead of loading only 57 chunks, you are loading about 109 chunks. I believe that's the number. I could be wrong, but I think that's it. And yeah, that is quite an increase. It's almost double the amount of chunks loaded, and that is also probably the reason why realms cannot turn the simulation distance higher than 4 chunks. That is also why I am not going to discuss the radiuses of simulation distance 6 and higher, because well, it is mostly irrelevant for normal gameplay. All you need to know is that when you are on simulation distance 6 and higher, the despawning will work fine enough, and it won't have the same issues that you see right here on the simulation distance of 4. So if this system does make it to the final release of 1.16, everyone that has to play or wants to play on a simulation distance of 4 is basically doomed, and if you are one of the lucky ones that can set their simulation distance to 6, well, then you will be fine, you will have a decent despawning system. Now I will answer your probably most burning question. Why did they reduce it from 54 to 44? It doesn't make much sense, does it? Well, it actually does. So as you may know, the loaded area in Minecraft Bedrock Edition is called the simulation distance, and it has a shape somewhat like this. So it's basically just a diamond, but the tips are cut off. So yeah, the loaded area does look like this, and of course this works in chunks. And since the simulated area is loaded in chunks and not blocks outwards from the player, but the spawning and despawning ranges are still locked to the player could theoretically stand in the exact corner of a chunk and depending on the range of the despawning or spawning or whatnot, the range could overlap outside of the loaded area, which is the simulation distance. So I made a little circle, well it's just a circular line going around, to demonstrate what the 54 block despawn radius looks like. So everything past that line right here, everything will be instantly despawned. And as you can see, when the radius is 54 blocks out from the player, well, there is a problem, and that problem is that the range slightly overlaps with the outside of the simulation distance. So in rare cases, a mob could be outside of the simulation distance, but the radius of the instant despawn would not properly apply, and this is for a radius of 54 blocks centered on the player. Of course, when the player, in this case the armor stand, is standing in the very center, then there won't be this issue. But since chunks are loaded well in chunks and not blocks outwards on the player, and the despawn and spawn radius is centered on the player, well, this can occur. Now we can take a look at the instant despawn radius that is implemented in this 1.16.0.61 beta. Now again, as I mentioned, the radius is around 44 blocks, and as you can see, when the player is standing right in the corner, it gets very close, but it does never cross the actual simulation distance range, and my theory is that this is why the instant despawn range was reduced from 54 blocks to 44 blocks. Now you might be wondering, why did they not reduce the spawning range? Because 24 to 54 blocks is already fairly small, and reducing it even further would also be detrimental to gameplay, where you could be on higher simulation distances. And well, of course, they didn't want that, luckily, because if they did make the spawning radius smaller, that would be a disaster. But yeah, this persists, and of course, since the despawn radius, the instant despawn radius is reduced from 54 plus to 44 plus, there is the 44 to 54 blocks range from the player where mobs will spawn and instantly despawn, which is unfortunate. So I think I covered the most important changes in this new 1.16.0.61 beta in the most clear way possible, especially the despawning and, well, kind of spawning changes, since they changed the armor stance not counting to mob cap, but there wasn't really any mob spawning changes at all. But yes, this is something that is quite concerning. There are definitely improvements that have to be made, and again, as I said, some people that you probably know and me are working on a proposition for a system that would work out much better for every type of gameplay, which means mob farms, or normal gameplay where you just walk around and don't want to get ambushed by mobs in every corner, but also where you don't want your world to be an empty wasteland without any mobs. So yeah, hopefully that video should be out soon. But of course, right now we are all discussing it and we are adding new propositions, so I wouldn't expect it too soon, but rather soon, because we don't know when the 1.16 update is going to come out. So we are indeed working on it together, and we are considering every opinion and perspective. So thank you very much for watching. I hope that cleared up the confusion about the changelog, because I do have to say the changelog is sort of vague as to what was actually changed. And well, I did the necessary testing. Maybe you were here yesterday. I was streaming and testing everything out, and that was actually quite tough, and it was also quite hilarious discovering the changes. And also, we were quite confused. But with that being said, I would like to thank you very much for watching this video, and make sure to subscribe, because I have more interesting content like this on my channel. And well, with that being said, bye!